Avoidant psychology. You didn't fight back. You left. There's a moment that changes everything in an avoidant relationship. And it's not when you cry, not when you explain, not when you demand answers. It's the moment you stop fighting. Not because you gave up, but because you finally understood. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't argue your case. You didn't chase clarity. You simply left. And to the avoidant mind, that moment is far more destabilizing than any confrontation ever could be. Because avoidants are prepared for conflict. They are wired for distance. They expect emotional reactions. What they are not prepared for is your silence combined with self-respect. They are not prepared for you choosing peace over proving a point. Avoidant psychology is built around one core survival strategy: control through emotional distance. From the outside, avoidants often look calm, logical, even detached in a way that seems powerful. But internally, their nervous system is highly sensitive to perceived threats, especially the threat of emotional dependence. When someone gets too close, too invested, too emotionally available, the avoidance system activates. They pull back. They go cold. They delay. They create confusion. And most partners respond exactly how the avoidant expects: by trying harder, by explaining themselves, by asking for reassurance, by fighting to be understood. This dynamic reinforces the avoidant's belief that closeness equals pressure and distance equals safety. That's why fighting back never truly works with an avoidant. Arguments still keep you emotionally engaged. Emotional explanations still center them. Even anger tells them, "I still need you to see me." And the avoidant, consciously or unconsciously, interprets this as control. They remain the emotional center of gravity. They get to withdraw while you orbit. But when you stop fighting, when you don't plead, don't accuse, don't negotiate, and instead you leave, something fundamentally shifts. Because leaving removes the emotional leverage they relied on. It disrupts the entire system. To an avoidant, your departure doesn't register immediately as heartbreak. At first, it feels like relief. The pressure is gone. The expectations are gone. The emotional intensity disappears. And they often tell themselves stories to justify it. It wasn't right anyway, or they were too much, or I needed space. This initial relief is real, but it's temporary, because what they don't realize yet is that relief is not the same as closure. And once the nervous system settles, something else begins to surface. What begins to surface is the absence they didn't expect to feel. Avoidants don't process loss in real time. Their attachment system suppresses emotion as a protective mechanism. So while you might grieve immediately, they delay it. Days or weeks later, something strange happens. They reach for their phone without thinking. They mentally reference you during moments of stress or success. They feel a subtle disorientation, like something stabilizing is missing. And that's when your leaving starts to register, not as relief, but as rupture. This is where avoidant psychology reveals its paradox. Avoidants crave connection, but fear dependency. They want intimacy, but on their terms. They want to feel chosen, but not obligated. And when you fought for them, you confirmed their belief that they could withdraw without consequence. But when you left without drama, without ultimatums, without begging for change, you communicated something far more powerful: I choose myself. And that message directly confronts their deepest fear, not of abandonment, but of inadequacy. Avoidants often carry a hidden belief that if someone truly sees them, they'll be disappointed. That closeness will eventually expose them as insufficient. So when you leave calmly, it triggers a haunting question they can't easily dismiss. Did they leave because I wasn't enough? This question lingers because you didn't confirm their narrative. You didn't chase them and prove you needed them more than they needed you. You didn't explode and justify their withdrawal. You left with dignity, and dignity is disarming. Another critical aspect of avoidant psychology is that they associate emotional intensity with danger. Raised in environments where emotions were overwhelming, inconsistent, or dismissed, they learned to self-regulate by minimizing attachment needs. That's why dramatic confrontations often push them further away. But your quiet exit does something unexpected. It feels safe enough for reflection. There's no immediate threat, no emotional chaos, and in that calm, their suppressed emotions have space to surface. This is often when avoidants begin to replay the relationship, not the arguments, but the moments of consistency you offered, the times you stayed steady, the ways you adapted, the patience you showed. They begin to realize that what they lost wasn't pressure, it was emotional safety. And this realization is deeply unsettling because it contradicts the story they told themselves to feel secure. You see, avoidants rely on a psychological hierarchy in relationships. They feel safe when they have more emotional control than their partner. When you fought back, even angrily, you were still invested, still reactive, still tethered. But when you left, you stepped out of that hierarchy. You reclaimed your emotional autonomy. And now they're the ones left without control, without access to your emotional world. That loss of access is what creates the internal collapse. Many people misunderstand this phase and think, if I just explain one last time, they'll get it. But explanation feeds the avoidance comfort zone. Leaving starves it, and starvation is what forces growth, or at least awareness. This doesn't mean they'll always come back, but it does mean they will feel the loss in a way they never felt your pain while you were still present. There's also something profoundly confronting about someone who doesn't need closure from you. Avoidants are accustomed to being the ones who withhold closure. They leave conversations unfinished. They avoid emotional resolution. But when you leave without demanding answers, you flip the script. You demonstrate that your peace doesn't depend on their validation. And that independence challenges their self-image more than any argument ever could. At this point, many avoidants experience a delayed emotional response that feels like anxiety, nostalgia, or restlessness. They may not label it as grief, but it shows up as rumination. They think about what they could have done differently. They wonder if they misjudged you. And for the first time, they face the reality that emotional distance doesn't protect them from loss. It guarantees it. But here's the most important part of this story, and it's not about them. It's about you. Because leaving without fighting isn't weakness. It's emotional maturity. It means you recognize that access to you is a privilege, not a right. It means you understood that explaining yourself repeatedly to someone committed to misunderstanding you is self-betrayal. And it means you finally chose alignment over attachment. The real power of leaving isn't that it makes an avoidant miss you. The real power is that it restores your nervous system. It removes you from a dynamic where love had to be earned through endurance. It allows you to recalibrate your sense of self-worth. And once you do that, something irreversible happens. You no longer fear losing people who are unwilling to meet you emotionally. Avoidants often sense this shift intuitively. They feel that you are no longer available in the same way, even if you're physically gone. Your energy changes. Your presence is no longer negotiable. And whether they return or not becomes secondary. Because the version of you who would fight to stay has evolved into someone who understands that real intimacy doesn't require persuasion. And this is why, psychologically, leaving is the loudest message you can send to an avoidant. It says, I see you clearly, and I choose myself anyway. That sentence echoes far longer than any argument ever could. So if you left without fighting, without begging, without trying to prove your worth, understand this: you didn't lose. You graduated. You stepped out of a dynamic that required you to abandon yourself. And in doing so, you did the one thing avoidant psychology never expects. You showed that love without self-respect is not love at all. Because the moment you stopped fighting and chose to leave was the moment you reclaimed your power.